Slurped up my G's. Hope you're doing wonderful. I apologise. The lighting in my videos is sometimes not very good because some of my bulbs have like blown and I need to replace them. But I'm not very good at doing good production quality videos. In case you haven't noticed, I just try to deliver the content information wise, and hope that's all right. Anyway, this is a response video to Arnold Dawson, who left a comment on the call and response video. And he says, Neurofunk, how would you describe the beat? For instance, drums. If you picked three, let's say, typical examples, what would they be and how would you subdivide them as parts? I don't know, but sometimes I think I hear like punctuation and then a let rip, then repeat, for example. I know there's no prescription for art, but it's great to hear the idiot's guide, so to speak. Yes, so there's so many different types of things you could do with Neurofunk drums, different types of drums to make, crazy drum fills where things speed up and slow down and then it's all over the place, loads of cool fills. What I try to do in my tracks is just to make the drums like as clean as possible and not too hectic, because for me in Neurofunk a lot of the mixdown is taken up by the bass line. So in a lot of my tracks, I'll try to keep the drums like fairly spacious, so that I can have a massive bass line across them, and it's not going to be super hard to get a great punchy mix down. So the only thing that I really pay attention to in the Neurofunk drums is to make sure that I've got the best possible high quality kick and snare samples that I can get, and they've got enough weight and punch in the low end and enough brightness in the high end to really cut through the bass line. And then when it comes to hats and percussion and other stuff like that, I tend to just have a few like kind of hat and cymbal loops like in the background of the drum beat to keep it going along. And then if I want to do something more hectic like drum fills and stuff, then I prefer to like create a little part of the track where I isolate that moment and then just focus on that, but maybe cut the bass line away or something like that. But here is a little loop that I've made for you to demonstrate how to make at least a nice and easy clean Neurofunk drum group. And for this, I've used all of the samples from my most recent sample pack, the Pyramid sample pack, which has a drum folder, and in there are lots of mastered kicks, snares, and cymbal loops, because I tend to use cymbal loops rather than one-shot hats, because you can have this naturally already realistic rhythm, which is difficult to program in yourself. It just takes a lot longer, you know. So here is the drum beat that I've created using only samples from that pack. And as you can hear, it's quite sort of clean and fairly straightforward, but that allows it then to fit nicely with the bass line. So I've just taken the liberty of loading in a quick Vital patch from my I think my latest preset pack, the most recent Vital one, the Discordant Neuropathy bass up. So let's play that with the bass now. So obviously, you know, I've just got one bass line loaded in, one Vital patch. It's not like I've done a whole call and response thing yet, or, you know, like you got into great detail. I've just sort of thrown one bass loop on top. But it in terms of the mix down, it sits quite nicely, you know, without much work with the drums, right? And the reason it kind of sits quite well, and you can hear like the powerful part of the bass and still hear the powerful like kicks and snares and everything, is because of the way that I've set up the drum group in terms of the dynamics of the layers, right? And so here's just a few tips in this video. I'll try to keep this short. We'll just quickly talk about the timing, because I've done a basic two-step pattern with the kick and snare, which is just the most classic drum and bass drum pattern that most of you guys already know. And essentially, if you take a look at what the timings are on the grid, you know, this is a whole bar, and then in between you've got 4 beats in a bar, right? and then well, you can what's smaller than a beat, like a quaver or a semi-quaver. So get your pack of quavers out. That's a crisp, by the way. The first kick is on the first beat. The snare is on the second beat. The third beat, there is a gap where we have nothing. Then halfway through the third beat, so between third and fourth, is the second kick. So that's on the off beat. So that's what creates the funk. And then on the fourth beat, we have the snare again, and then that just repeats. Okay, so that's the two-step kick pattern. Very easy. You'll notice down here, these are what you call ghost snares, right? These are the ghost hits. So if I take them off for a moment, all the punch and the weight is just coming from the quality of the low end that's already in the samples. I've not boosted it or anything. I've just picked out the samples in my pack that for the kick that had the best weighty low end characteristic, and the snare one that just fitted best with the kick and has a nice character on it as well. If we just take a look at this ghost note then. So this is a classic spot in the groove to place a ghost note, and that is exactly on this third beat where we have a gap. If you go just one semi-quaver to the left and then one semi-quaver to the right, I might have got that right, that terminology. I literally just Googled that before this video because I was trying to think what's smaller than a beat, and I think it's a semi-quaver. I think two of those is one quaver and one little notch is a semi-quaver. Don't quote me on that, I'm not really sure. But if you listen, you can hear the timing. It's just like one click to the left and one click to the right of this gap is where I place the ghost hits. And what the ghost hits are, is they're actually the same snare sample, but basically turned down and shortened. So I've just actually shortened the file, faded it off quicker, and then I've applied some effects to it. And I'll talk about all the processing in a moment, but I just wanted to talk about the timing of things. So kick and snare on a two-step pattern with a little ghost snare shuffle. Okay, makes it very drum and bass already. Then the next thing is just to add in some hats and shakers, and basically I've sort of used like a slow hat loop, a slightly faster hat loop, and then a really fast shaker loop. So there's kind of like three rhythmical timings going on. So this is the warrior hats, and this is like you have one hat on every beat, so I think that's like quarter notes, I think. And then the second hat is going to be like the eighth notes. So this is where you've got one hat, two hats per beat, so just to double the rhythm base, double the speed, you know. And they have a bit of a different texture. So the first one, the kind of slower metronome hat, has a bit more of a sharper transient. It's a bit more like in your face, like with the click on the hat. Okay, and again, I mentioned I've used these loops because in the cymbal loops, I've applied like a level of realism into them already. So the hats are all like slightly different, so they don't feel so robotic. So you don't have to like, you know, if you just used a one-shot hat and repeated it, it's going to sound a bit, stale. So they've got realism programmed into them. So the first one, as I mentioned, slow. Second one goes with it, but it's a faster rhythm, and the hats are a bit looser in a sense. Like they're a bit more white noisy, a bit more washy, and a bit of a softer attack. So they kind of blend in with the first one better because there's not such a sharp transient on them. So the transient on the first one kind of overtakes the second one. So they kind of fit together like a nice little puzzle piece. Okay, because you want to layer up your cymbals to give detail into the background, so you want to use more than one. Then I've got a shaker here, which is like a... then this is kind of doing the 16th rhythm, so simple shaker. You can make one yourself, like just go into the kitchen and get like, I don't know, fill up a plastic bottle with some rice. There's many ways to make a shaker. I once actually got stopped by the police in Albania because I made a shaker in Greece on the beach with a can of beer and sand, and I taped it up with masking tape, and it was like a shaker. And I had it in my car at the time. And then when I crossed the border into Albania, they searched the car, and they found this like taped up beer can, and they were like, they thought it was something naughty inside, and they undid all the masking tape and then poured all the sand out onto the floor, and I was like, oh, my shaker, damn it. But anyway, it was necessary so that they'd let me actually through the border control. So it was, yeah, I lost that shaker though. But yeah, this is a little shaker loop, fast one, and then I've got a secondary one, which is the exact same speed, but it's just a different tonality, and it just like adds an extra harmonic. So you've got two kind of different shakers with different tones. Okay, so with our hats and the shakers, you know, different timing hats, but 4 kind of cymbal loops, that's probably, you know, a good amount to give a good level of complexity without going overboard. Back in with our kicks and snares and everything. The next thing to note is that, you know, still give all the priority to that powerful feeling of the punch of the low end of the kick and snare. So I've done a lot of work to make the cymbals not override or step out of, you not to cross the boundaries of the kick and snare's dominance, you know. So always set your boundaries with your drum elements, okay? So the kick has the dominance, and the snare is, you know, slightly under the kick, and then the cymbals are like behind all of that, yeah. So if we just take a look at what I've done then to the processing. So for the kick and the snare, you'll see I've double tracked them, and I've done this so I can create a little reverb, a convolution reverb layer for each one. Okay, so the first up the kick, this is just straight out of the sample pack, done no work on it, essentially just boosted the gain a little bit, made it a bit louder, and clipped the audio. All of my sounds that go above 0 will be clipped to 0 using the clip to 0 method, which there's actually like a YouTube series about the clip to 0 method, which is like fairly recent, but I've been actually promoting the clip to 0 method through all of my videos from 4 or 5 years ago. So you can also watch my old videos, and I've been doing the exact same thing since I first began. I've been using that method for about 10 years. And if you don't know too much about that, it's basically a way that you can. It's a whole nother story. But most of you already know. Essentially, when you don't want things to go into the red, right, and you don't need to use a limiter to get volume on your sound. You can just boost the actual volume of the sound and then clip it, and you'll get like a really flat kind of no effects applied. And when you clip it, you can just see how far you can push it. It's a long story. Anyway, clip your channels. Know that it's going to serve you well. So I've clipped the kick, and then there's no processing on, but like I said, I wanted to add this convolution layer underneath it. So the convolution layer is the same sample run through the small control room, which is a setting on kilohertz convolver, but you just run through any of them, and then just take a bunch of the low end out, you know, and then I've got this lovely little room sound, which just provides a little bit of a tail to the kick, which was sort of kind of stops in the middle of nowhere. But now with this little room sound, it just feels a bit more natural, you know? It feels like it sort of finishes off a bit smoother, doesn't quite go into like nothingness so quickly, you know? They go into a group as a transient shaper to tighten the kick up a bit, you know, make it a little bit shorter, just a tiny bit. And then I've actually taken out a bit of mid-range on the kick, because the important part is the low end. I'm not really going to mess with that. It's really important to keep that nice and weighty, in my opinion. But here, I just found I was able to get, just by taking out a little bit of mid-range, sometimes it gives a little bit more priority to the low end and the high end, and that's kind of yes, can be quite nice sometimes on the kick. Depends on the sample. Anyway, let's move on because I'm trying to keep this short and I'm not really doing a good job at that. So the snare, I've done the same thing. So I've picked a snare sample, and I've basically just done nothing to it, just faded it out, and then copied it over to, again, make a convolution version. And this one, it's quite quiet as well. I didn't mention that the kick convolution layer, make sure you turn it down. It's got to be lower in the mix. But here with this one, I've chosen a different preset, and this is like in the small experimental folder, and it's called the water boiler, right? And it just sounds like this if I turn it back up again. Okay, just has a nice little extra stereo little spread. It's really, really tight and controlled. And just really, really low in the mix, taking out some low end, shaping the transient to make it a bit softer. So I'm just trying to fit it in with the original, you know? So those are the convolution layers done with the kick and the snare. Yeah, and the snare also goes into a little snare group just to control it again. And again, I've just taken the sustain down, because like when you do that on the whole group, it kind of glues things together because you're shaping the end of the sound at all of the layers together, so you're sort of giving it this natural finish. EQing it just to take out some of the low end that doesn't need to be in the snare, because the fundamental of the snare is usually around this sort of area. Can be anywhere between 200 and 500 really, but this snare is quite nice, around 300 or so, or just a bit higher. So that's the kind of area, whereas a fat snare should sort of sit usually between 200 and 500, okay? 300 is pretty average. The kick, again, like you can have as much low end in as you want. I've really gone for like a bassy kick, you know, because I just prefer those kind of really powerful low end kicks, you know. But yeah, so that's basically the snare and the kick in their kind of groups. And the snare, I've just turned it down like -2, so it's slightly sort of lower than the kick. Kick's like almost up at 0, and then the snare's just slightly lower. Okay, not much else to say about that really. I put the little ghost hits back in, and just for the ghost hits, again, I mentioned, I've just taken the exact snare, shortened it, made it like lower in volume, and then I've added some tape to it. So this is my favorite tape plugin, the OCS 45. And you can make the sound a bit like have a bit of a random pitch drift on it and that kind of thing. So it's difficult to notice exactly on such a tight snare, but essentially it'll put a little pitch movement in, so each ghost hit is slightly different, and a little bit of like artificial noise as well. And I've put a couple of convolutions on to soften the ghost hit a bit, so there's a little live room sound mixed in. There's also a little, again, the water boiler, the same one I used for the other snare. I've used that convolution just to like 20%. And it just, you hear it makes it just quite nice and soft. So it's sitting better in the background. Really like on a much lower velocity than the actual main snare, you know? So there we got our kick and snare together. And then with the cymbals, really, really simple. Now, I don't have to spend too much time talking about those. You know, I've already talked about how I picked the loops, so they kind of fit with each other. Just a little bit of transient shaping on all of them. So taking the sustain down is a massive thing because, again, I mentioned I really like to have my drums really, really tight so that there's a lot of space for the bass line, you know. And so when you have these cymbal loops, like the ones I've made, there's often like a lot of noise in the sample, like it kind of keeps going and going, you know? And if you want to just have those individual kind of hits without all the background noise, then simply throw on a transient shaper, turn the sustain down on some of the loops, you know, and you can make it a lot tighter, and you can find that balance yourself of how much kind of, like overhead room sound you want on it versus like how just tight and snappy you want it to be to the beat. Okay, same with this one here, this like faster one. I've taken the sort of overhead noise down a little bit. Then on the shaker, I've really taken down a lot here on this one. It's quite loose without that, you know. So that sustain adjustment there takes the shaker to a much tighter kind of level, you know. Same for this secondary shaker down here, also taking the sustain down a lot, because again, that one, yeah, I've really tightened it up. So tightening cymbal loops up a lot is usually a good way to go to get clear out that extra space. Taking out some low end in some of the samples as well. Here I've done a little bit of reverb on that one for just to give it a bit more stereo spread, I suppose, and taking down a bit more of the sustain again. So each sample needs different treatment, and just mix it by ear yourself. But essentially, transient shaping is going to be your biggest friend when it comes to that kind of thing. Then the cymbals go into a little group, and I like to compress the cymbal group to control the volume of it, because with cymbals you have loads of different hi-hats and things all fighting and conflicting for attention at the same time, and sometimes there'll be like 3 or 4 hats that stack up on top of each other, and then suddenly you get this like intense volume spike, which only happens like on certain moments during the loop. And for those occasions, that's why a compressor is good, because it'll pick those moments when everything stacks up too loudly, and it'll just naturally bring it down for you. So whenever things get a little bit too loud, the compressor will just control it, so the whole cymbal group is a bit more solid, like more of a level, like the volume levels are a bit more balanced. So just a little compressor just to control the peaks, taking out a bit more low end, and then final little bit of transient shaping to actually tighten the whole thing up again a little bit more. You know, just always finding that balance between the overhead noise and the actual transients of the hats. Those are the two things I'm always listening to. So once I've got a happy balance with that, turning it down a little bit, I can make it so that it kind of fits dynamically with the kick and snare without having done any side chaining, just from the perfect setup of the dynamics of the volumes and the transients. So the kick and snare, you can really feel their weight, you can feel their punch cutting through, while the cymbals are also doing their thing, and they're just balanced just right, so they're not getting in the way of each other. And then when I've done that, I've basically achieved what I consider to be like the perfect balance of a drum group. Okay, so then I've got a clean Neurofunk drum groove ready to fit my bass line with, you know? And the cymbals, the snare, the kick, they all go into like a drum bus. And if you've set everything up right, and you've done your dynamics well, and you've used great quality samples like the ones from my pack, then you don't really have to over-process stuff. So I've just, for fun, like thrown on one little analog emulation plugin, which is the SDRR, and just turned the treble up, because it kind of boosts the treble in a nice way. But even that, I've just mixed in the overall amount to like 17% or so, and that just... There's a little brightness lift on everything, but it's quite subtle. If I wanted to go and process things more, I could make a whole like nuke layer, or like a distortion layer, bounce out the whole drum group, run some effects on it, EQ out some of the low end, and then kind of mix in like a parallel signal. That's something I could definitely do, but for now that's absolutely fine, and I could use that as my final drum sound in a track, absolutely no problem. And because it's nice and clean and structured and well set up, I can then focus on the fun parts, the musicality, the bass elements and all that, and I've got a lot of space in the composition to have something like a fat, juicy, vital bass in there. And just kind of like didn't even need to mix it down really. I've just literally thrown on a tiny little low end multi-band compressor to bring the bass down a little bit from the kick drum, just the low end. So the low end just comes down a little bit every time the kick hits with a little side chain. But the rest of it is like kind of like doesn't need much work. You know, you can kind of hear clearly the power of the drums and the power of the bass without having even mixed it down so much, because of the compositional things that I've taken into account when designing the drum group to make sure that it's dynamically structured well and the sound quality is high on the samples. So well structured dynamic drum groups plus high quality original samples in a clean way result in powerful fat Neurofunk drums, which are not trying to be something too mental and leave enough space for a big fat bass line as well. So that's my little answer for you today on how I typically approach Neurofunk drums and why I like to keep them as clean as possible. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow. Much love.